Okay, so we're going to talk about the rules of composition when using a camera. And just like the video you watched a little bit ago mentioned, it does not matter if you have your phone for a camera, a regular old boring digital camera from home, or one of our big giant DSLR cameras. If you don't make it a habit to do some of these different types of composition rules when you take photos, your pictures will be really boring. And that's just not acceptable for our yearbook staff or for our website or anything else that we use pictures for. So let's get familiar with some of the rules of composition and talk about how you can start taking better pictures regardless of the type of camera that you have in your possession. So these are the main ones we're going to talk about today. Rule of thirds, framing, center of interest, balance, leading lines and curves, pattern and repetition, and camera angle. So probably the biggest composition rule in photography and videography is the use of rule of thirds. I want you to imagine every time you look through the viewfinder of the camera that there is a tic-tac-toe board and that you put the center of interest on one of the intersecting points of the tic-tac-toe board. So here, or here, or here, or here. Notice that the subject's head is in this quadrant, okay, rather than putting it here in the center. We are naturally sort of predisposed to want to put all people in the center of the viewfinder. I am going to challenge you to stop doing that. We want to use these little intersecting points to put our center of interest so that we have a more interesting photo. So let's take a look at some more examples. So we're on the soccer field and we're shooting. Rather than positioning this gentleman here in the middle, we've made the choice to use the rule of thirds and get him into that quadrant. Makes for a more interesting photo. This young guy doing a backflip here with the band. Notice that again, we didn't stick him in the center. He's in this third of the quadrant. These guys are both in rule of thirds quadrants. This young lady here, her eyes are in this quadrant. So the rule of thirds is really important. And this is a composition rule that you can use with other rules that we're going to talk about next. I would encourage you to always try to shoot in a rule of third manner and avoid putting your subject directly into the center of your viewfinder. All right, next, framing. So using natural objects that are out in the environment to create a frame can really add some interest to your picture. It can also draw the eye to the subject or the center of interest which we want to have happen. So this young lady sitting in the library reading a book. I want you to think about where you would have to position yourself with your camera in order to take this photo. Where would you have to be standing in order to get this shot with her framed? And if you didn't have the frame or didn't want the frame for some reason, where then would you have to stand? So see, by moving your body and taking notice of objects and things in your surroundings and moving yourself to a position where you can get that person framed. So this photographer didn't go up to this young lady and say, "Hey, Sarah, will you stop reading and turn over here so that I can get this frame of you with this book?" No, this photographer looked at the surroundings, saw the bookshelf, moved to the other side of it, and made the choice to take the photograph so that they used the bookshelf to frame her face. A couple more examples of framing. The music stands in band and orchestra and choir come in handy quite often to make nice frames. Knowing your environment sometimes can be really helpful, thinking about what frames sort of exist in classrooms that are natural to the environment. The one to your left is through one side of a car and out the other and using the window as a frame. Not sure we would really use something like that for the yearbook, but the point is the photographer purposely made that frame happen to get that person in that spot by positioning themselves on the opposite side of the car. More examples of framing that would be school related. Using the computer screen as a frame. We have these sitting all the time now at our desks. Sometimes getting into classrooms can almost be boring to shoot pictures because the students are sitting so much in the computer era. We've got to get creative and use those frames when we have them available to give a little more variety to our photos. Notice where the student was standing in the middle picture there in order to frame that young man sitting at the desk. That student is down, probably on their knees, on the floor, shooting through a different desk in order to get that photo, which is fantastic, and what a cool picture. And then on the far right, you have the person detonating the rocket or whatever there. You might say, well, I don't really see a frame. Well, the frame, if you look at it, is the foreground of the rocket and the background of the teacher or whoever's next to that person detonating the rocket. They're using those two people to create, or I'm sorry, those two objects, the person is one and the rocket is the other, to create a frame around the subject. This is some pretty obvious framing here, and I think this picture came up in that other video if you watched it. But, you know, again, making sure to take the photo so that you're utilizing the frame. All right, so sometimes we want to just shoot out in the natural world without necessarily having a frame, and we want to make sure that we highlight that there's a center of interest to our photo. This is such a cool photo for so many reasons. This one has several types of composition. One is repetition, which is something we're going to talk about in a few minutes. But if you look at all the repetition of the hats, that makes it so interesting. But notice that the photographer also knows how to use their camera settings to blur the foreground or the front area of the picture. This is actually all blurry. And that the center of interest becomes this gentleman with the poofier hair and the taller hat, and that he then becomes, I'm assuming it's a he for some reason, becomes the center of interest by making that picture happen on purpose that way. Sometimes center of interest is just moving in really close to your subject so that we know exactly what our center of interest is. And this is just a great emotional picture right here. There's such a great story with this photo. And this is one of the biggest things you can do to be a better photographer, is just to get closer. And that doesn't mean use your zoom lens. It means move your feet and get as close as possible to the subject as you can without getting yourself into trouble. Center of interest here becomes the baseball. I'm not sure I particularly care for that, but this again was an on-purpose photo where they wanted to make the baseball be the center of interest, and the player is blurred out on purpose using the settings on the camera to make that happen. Center of interest, zooming in on that person so that we have the facial expression, the eyes, and the making of the mocha coffee. Over here, making sure we've got, and by the way, notice the rule of thirds here and here with the eyes. We've got rule of thirds in both of these pictures as well. More center of interest, making sure that we get close enough for there to be that center of interest with the eyes, And then over here, that great repetition style shot again, where we have the one young man yawning, which is gonna make me yawn. Oh. By everybody else having not that expression, this then becomes the center of interest. Very cool shot. Patient shot. Another way that you can make a very interesting photo without having to have a fancy camera is to use balance. So when you can place the main subjects a little off center, then that gets a little more interesting to look at. Sometimes placement of people can balance out an image, so we've got one on each side, so there's balance to this. By having the horse bronching here and the body here, this offers balance to the page. This person's slant offers balance here and balance here. And again, balance, balance, middle. Another type of composition that you should take advantage of when it presents itself, but you have to look for it. It's not like a leading line or a curve is necessarily just going to pop out and be there for you. You have to be looking for that. This one, because they're lined up and walking, sort of does present itself, but there are other ways to use lines and curves to your advantage. But this is definitely a fun photo because for a lot of reasons. There's a line and a curve. There's also a shadow, so we've got repetition. We've got repetition with the holding of the hands. There's a ton of things going on here that make this a cool picture. Now this is a better example of leading lines and curves that I would want you to be looking for in your environment. Are there countertops or tables or things on the floor or rails or things of that nature that you could utilize to draw the eye of your subject into that center of interest? So this nice long shoot gives us that run right up to the young man. Beautiful shot. This is so cool. Look at that unusual angle getting down low, which we'll talk about in a minute. But on top of that, utilizing the lines and the curves to zoom right around up into this student's face. Lots of lines going on here. I love this shot. It's got a lot going on here. Very cool. And a lot of people would have shot this right here so that you didn't know what was going on. And it's so much better to have those tall cups in there to tell that story. Now, if you can get a pattern or repetition into your photo, that's really awesome. This is such a cool picture. You got repetition, you've got a pattern, you've got rule of thirds, lots going on there. The fence providing that pattern repetition. Anytime people are doing things in unison, it makes for a really interesting photo. Now let's talk about those unusual angles. If you only stand at your normal stance with the camera, at eye level, all of your pictures are going to come out with the exact same angle, and that's going to be really boring. So another way that you can totally change up what you're doing is to get down low, stand on a chair, get up high, off kilter your camera. Do things that get you to a different perspective than what we're used to seeing, which is just from eye level to eye level. So for this photo to have happened, the photographer had to get underneath this glass table and shoot it, which is really ambitious and really cool. They're willing to take that risk. I don't know how we got this add a comment box, if I can get rid of that. There we go. We're just going to ignore that. So the gym, in our gym, you'd have to be standing up in the stands with a pretty good sized lens, because we don't have that ability we don't have the above deck type thing to stand on and shoot down. But there are still ways to achieve camera angle in the gym, just you have to be careful about where your subject is located. And then with the softball girl there, getting behind her, getting down low makes that great angle. You gotta be down low to get this. Same thing here. Gotta be up high to get this. Very cool. So some things to think about to become a better photographer. Don't overthink stuff. I would keep things simple as far as not trying to get too many things going on in any one photo. Start out just practicing the rule of thirds. You know, if you notice a pattern or repetition, if you see a leading line, go ahead and utilize it, but don't try to sock 5 or 6 things into one photo. That gets really complicated. Probably the single best tip in the universe for taking a better photo is to move closer. How many of you have opened up an old photo album from someone in your family and all of the people are like less than the size of your smallest pinky fingernail on a, 4x6 or 3x5 type photograph, and then all the space around them is just background or dead? We don't want that. We want to get close. We want to fill that frame right up with either the person or the action or the event or the center of interest. Get closer and do not use the big zoom to avoid having to take the steps to get closer. It makes your photo more grainy. So you want to get as close as you physically can to your subject without zooming. And then if you have to zoom, you do. Like the football field, for example. We would not shoot from up in the stands. We would get right to the sideline. They're not going to let us go any further out, obviously, onto the field than that. But you have to be at that sideline. And then you use your zoom. You don't use your zoom from the stands. Being aware of light. This is really important. A concept called backlighting, where you need to make sure that all light coming into a room is behind you and never in front of you. If you want to test that theory out, go take a camera and point it directly at a window, maybe with some light coming in on the other side, and you're going to find that your subject turns black like a shadow, which is not what you want to have happen. That's called backlighting. So you want to turn your body around and let the window be to your back, because that serves as a way for light to come in over your shoulders and take better photos. Anytime you can capture emotions, this is a good thing, okay? Whether it's crying, laughing, seriousness, anger, whatever it is. You want that emotion in your picture. And again, the only way you're going to get that is if you get close enough to capture the emotion. A little tiny person in a giant frame of a picture we are not going to be able to read that emotion. We have to be close up to the face of the person to get that. And make sure you tell the whole story. Just like I said, that picture of the girl with the cups that were shooting up to the sky, if they had shot that and cut off the picture, you would have no idea that she's trying to do some outrageously long, ridiculous chain of cups to go up to the sky. You would just think she was had a bunch of stacks about her height if you had cropped that picture differently, which wouldn't be true. Keeping it simple. It's just a beautiful, beautiful picture right there. Other very simple shots. Getting closer always looks nice. Really important. Look how much cooler that is with that close-up shot. Same thing, getting closer. Now light, again, if you're trying for a special effect like this person was, they shot on purpose into the sun to make that shadow happen. That's cool, but we wouldn't put this probably in the yearbook because we can't see who the person is. So we would want to turn our body around and have that sunlight illuminate that subject. More examples of light. How about that capturing the emotion? Definitely important. Getting those reaction moments, those happy moments, those defeats, those joyous moments. You guys have these in school all the time. We need to capture all the different emotions for our yearbook. Make sure you tell the whole story. Get it all. So, do not just run around with a camera and take random pictures. Think about that list. Take that list and put it in your pocket so that when you suddenly go blank, you can pull it out and go, oh yeah, let me work on some leading line shots. Or how about if I try to find a natural frame here in the room? Or, oh, I haven't been taking very many rule of thirds photos. I need to work on that. Keep that list in your pocket. Thank you.